we were all kind of shocked. It was like, oh my gosh, we're hooked up, and grabbed the rod and went to battle on a 50-pound bluefin. Matt was he was so fired up to get a bluefin in February.
How about that for a teaser intro? Welcome to episode 7 of the Western Outdoor News podcast. This week we have that exclusive story that you just got a glimpse of a second ago. Bluefin in February. We're talking about it with Bob Hoose, who also shared some intel that not a lot of people know about.
I'm going to tell you a little story, and not that many people are aware of it.
You have to stick around to hear the full scoop from Bob, and later on in the show, we have a Fred Hall Show legend, Mike Lum. He discusses the legacy of one of the biggest outdoor conventions in the world.
It only makes sense that if you go to the Fred Hall Show and you see 400,000 square feet of displays, that you can't expect to go into your local tackle store and see all that stuff. It's impossible.
And he tells us about his efforts with Rollo's Kids at Sea, a program that puts kids out on sport fishing boats to introduce them to the ocean like they have never seen before. But first, you might have noticed that your recent issue of Western Outdoor News is a little bit thicker than usual this week. That's because this issue includes our spring preview. It features new product releases, exclusive offers for our readers, and much, much more. With no trade shows to kick off this season, Western Outdoor News has gathered up all the latest and greatest from the top brands and companies in the industry, and we put them in our spring outdoor preview edition of Western Outdoor News. If you are not a current subscriber, don't worry. Run to your local tackle shop or marina to pick up the latest copy of Western Outdoor News. And if you're in the Orange County area, our local shop of the week has you covered and sells copies right in the shop. This week, we heard from Sharkbait. Located in Huntington Beach, they have one of the biggest sales of the year happening this weekend through March 7th. Don't just take it from me. Here is the owner of Sharkbait in Huntington Beach, Mark Smith.
Hi, this is Mark from Sharkbait, and this is kind of a unique week. It is the annual Fred Hall Show Customer Appreciation Sale that we have here at our Huntington Beach shop. While there is no Fred Hall Show this year, for us, the show goes on because we're still very appreciative of the support our clients have given us over the course of a year. This is one event we don't talk about specifics a heck of a lot. Basically, it is a thank you to our customers, and I don't think anyone has ever been disappointed. The sale prices are going to be very, very clearly marked. We typically have people lined up outside the door. We'll do some accommodation for those who are concerned about COVID-19. But it is a wonderful event, and you'll see a lot of your friends, and it is kind of a beginning of getting back to normal, which is what 2021 ought to be about. So if you can, please come down and visit the shop.
And if you missed this weekend's sale at Sharkbait through March 7th, 2021, feel free to stop on by. As he said, very knowledgeable, very friendly staff, always willing to help at Sharkbait. All right, so let's get to our first big story of the day. Bob Hoose, he's going to tell you all about his trip down to Punta Colonet.
The trip was started last week, and a good friend of mine, Matt Barlow, he purchased the Limitless, which is a 44 Pacifica. And the Pacifica is a legendary boat for the West Coast. They were made in Costa Mesa in the 70s. I actually own a 36 Pacifica. They're very sought out by, hardcore anglers. And this particular boat, the Limitless, it's a six-pack, meaning you can have charters for up to 6 passengers. So my friend Matt Barlow, who's the owner-operator of the Limitless, he's based out of Mission Bay, right above San Diego. And we drove down there on a Sunday night. This was the first trip of his charter business. And so he was excited and nervous. And we had a great crew. We had Lawrence from Fishworks. We had Dwayne from Pinnacle Sport Fishing. Myself, a couple other guys. So it was an industry crew trip. And our plan was to go down to an area called Punta Colonet. It's 118 miles south of the border. And Punta Colonet is a popular area in February, March, April for the San Diego and Mission Bay boats to go down on 1.5 day, 2-day trips to target the rockfish. And sometimes if you get lucky, if the conditions are right, there's good schools of yellowtail in that area as well. So mostly this time of the year, if you're on a Colonet trip, you're going to focus on the very good rock fishing, and specifically the vermilion rockfish, which is a super tasty rockfish on the grill, sauteed, fish tacos. So we're going down there to load up on rockfish, bring some back for the freezer and fish taco nights. And also you get a shot at yellowtail. So we left Sunday night. We had a great weather window. There was no wind, a little bit of swell. And interesting for this time of year, Matt Barlow, the captain, had studied the terrafin charts, which give him an idea what the water is going to look like down there, the color of the water, which is chlorophyll, and also the temperature. And he noticed that there was some cleaner, warmer water in that 60, 61 degrees outside and above Colonet. And so his plan was on the first day to swing on the outside and look at that water for a possibility of bluefin tuna. We woke up in the morning, ran all night, got in the zone in the morning, and sure enough, we started seeing schools of bluefin tuna. And they were right on that edge where the water goes from like 60, 61 blue-green to like 58, 59 and off-colored green. They're right on that edge. We found the bird life by looking through gyro binoculars, and we got on 2 or 3 good schools, deployed fly line sardines, and threw a lot of chum. The problem was our bait was not doing very well. It didn't have good scales on it, and it felt dry.
Actually, up to this point, it seemed like a textbook fishing experience.
If we would have had better bait, we probably could have stopped some of those schools and maybe got a bite. You got to have everything perfect, your leader, your hook, your presentation, and they just were not interested in our weak bait. And we threw some surface iron and poppers at them and tried to get a reaction, and no bites. And after about the 3rd school, I had brought down some jet heads, tail chaser jet heads. And one particular jet head that I've been fishing for these tuna is called the Little Scoop, and it's got a scoop nose, 5 jet heads. And I put that jet head back about 150 feet back, just one, and we were up on the fly bridge, and 20 minutes later the rod goes off, and we were all kind of shocked. It was like, oh my gosh, we're hooked up. And one of our friends on the trip, grabbed the rod and went to battle on a 50-pound bluefin. So we got the bluefin, and Matt was he was so fired up to get a bluefin in February. So we got the 50-pounder, got back on the look, and we found a kelp patty. And typically the kelp patties don't hold fish this time of the year, but the moon, the sun, the stars were all lined up, and we pulled up this kelp patty, and there was a school of yellowtail on it. So we ended up with 10 yellowtail on a couple kelps in that same water. They were 10 to 12 pound yellowtail, and just had so much fun catching yellowtail on light gear, 20, 25 pound setups. Mm-hmm. So we got this bluefin on board. We got 10 yellowtail, and we're feeling pretty good about our trip so far. And we slid down the beach and pointed it towards Punta Colonet. We got to Punta Colonet right before dark, and Matt's plan was to just because the seas were so calm, we decided to just shut down right outside the bank in deeper water, and we just drifted. And I went into the galley, and on these trips, it's really good food, kind of like the long range trips. We ended up cooking, what did we have the first night? We had pasta, like a great pasta dinner, Caesar salad, garlic bread, had some beers, plenty of laughs. And it was just dead calm. So during the night or before we went to bed, we got all our tackle converted over to rockfish and put away all the tuna gear. Just got everything ready, prepared for battle in the morning. And we woke up, beautiful sunrise, and Matt slid into the Punta Colonet rocky area, which is underwater reefs, and it's in like 30 to 60 fathoms. So you're fishing anywhere from like 360 feet to 240 feet. That's like the depth for the rockfish. And Matt started metering around, and on the first drop, everyone got bit on nice quality reds, which is the vermilion. So I love rock fishing. I mean, a lot of people don't see a lot of excitement in reeling a couple rockfish up from 300 feet, but we're using light tackle. We're using 25 narrow size reels, 65-pound braid, and then like a 7-8 foot medium light rod and a 10 to 12 ounce torpedo sinker. And then you make a couple dropper loops above your sinker. We had boxes of squid, so we had stripped out the squid, and you put a couple strips on. And when Matt lines the boat up on these reefs and he sees the fish on the meter, he gives the call to drop. And some of the guys, after catching a bunch, they switched over to fishing the jigs. And that Shimano Colt Sniper 100 gram was working really well. One of the guys was using a Salis 7X heavy. He got some nice reds on that. I switched over after I got a bunch on the bait. I went to the jig and I was fishing that Colt Sniper and actually dropped down to a little calico bass outfit. And that was just a blast. We're filling our limits on these vermilions. And the thing about vermilions is most people are like, when they see the 4, 5, 6 pounders, they're, really excited. But we have found out that the 2 to 3 pounders are the best eating. So you don't necessarily want the giant red. I mean, don't get me wrong there. They pull, they rattle, pretty much the whole way up. And some of them even pull drag, the bigger ones. But if you get that 2 to 3 pound red and you fillet it and have it for fish tacos, it is the best. We ended up with 1 lingcod there. We caught some miscellaneous whitefish, sheephead, chuckleheads, all the various rockfish. And the neat thing about it, we are the only boat there. The fun thing about this 44 Pacifica is when they designed them, they were mostly boats for bill fishing. On the West Coast style, I mean, a lot of times we're casting baits to tailors and sleepers and feeding striped marlin from the bow. So this boat has a waist-high bow railing from the pulpit, which is right out at the end, all the way back to the transom. So when Matt goes on a drift for rockfish and you got 6 guys, instead of all being bunched up in the cockpit, we spread ourselves out along the rail. So one guy's up near the bow, another guy's like on the foredeck, another guy's like right by the salon window, and then a guy every like 10 feet. And that way you have plenty of room. There was 8 of us on the boat. There was, 7. There was 5 anglers, captain, and crew member. And so the crew and captain were out there with us catching fish, which was really cool. So no tangles. The boat fishes that type of rock fishing really well because everyone can spread out. When you're on a kelp and yellowtail fishing, same thing. A lot of times, a couple guys, like when we were fishing those kelps, a couple guys would bait up and run up to the bow and pitch a bait off the bow, and you have just plenty of room. If you like throwing the iron on the long rods, on the long jig sticks, 8 to 10 foot jig sticks, you can go up on the bow and there's no antennas. It's wide open. And, for beginners and even intermediates, it's a great platform to fish iron and poppers. And So I'm a big fan of the Pacificas just for that reason.
That entire story that you just said, it was literally why Southern California is one of the best fisheries. Everything that you just said was like the perfect fishing trip.
I'm going to tell you a little story, and not that many people are aware of it, but after we caught the tuna, we were catching these big Bonitos. They were 12 to 14 pound, and a lot of times in the winter, those big Bonito are it's the first wave of fish that migrates up, and we were catching them on the troll. And most people, Bonitos have a bad reputation as not being very good table fare. And we have found that if you bleed them, if you cut the gill raker when the fish comes aboard, it bleeds out. It's very humane. You cut the gill raker and they bleed out. The Limitless has an insulated saltwater fish hold. And so after you bleed the fish, the yellowtail, the rockfish, the tuna, of course, we throw them down into this insulated fish hold and, put the lid on it, and it gets just above freezing. So it keeps the fish really firm and cold, and it's got a sump pump down there. So all the extra ice, melted ice and blood and stuff and water gets pumped out. So when you get back to the landing after your trip, your fish is just perfect condition. I mean, it's all clean and cold. So we took that Bonito and we filleted it, and you get a nice fillet on a 10 to 14 pound Bonito. And you cut out the red meat, and you're just left with this beautiful fillet that almost looks like a tuna fillet. It's ruby red, it's clean, it's very tender. And we chop it up and make pokey on it. And if I had a bowl of Bonito pokey and Bluefin pokey and blindfolded most people, they could not tell the difference. It's that good. So
wow.
When you get those Bonito on the boat, you take care of them, and that's the key. You got to ice it down, put it in a cooler or a fish bag with plenty of ice, or the insulated, fish hold, and then you got to bleed them. You got to get that blood out of the fish, fillet it, cut the red out, and you got yourself delicious pokey.
You started by making us jealous, and now you're making us all hungry. So thanks for that.
It was such a, like you said, it was such a variety trip. We came back with quality rockfish. Everyone got a couple big bags of vermilion rockfish. We got yellowtail fillets, and then we split up that 50-pound bluefin. So the best thing about these trips is there's plenty of bunks. There's there's a forward stateroom, a master stateroom, 2 heads or bathrooms on the boat. So I mean, if you want to take a nap, you just walk down and take a nap. If you want to eat, make something in the galley. If you want to fish, you go out and fish. I mean, it's like a full service. You're totally relaxed. Everyone turned their phones off, no emails, and we were just out there fishing. Had a great trip.
Well, thank you so much, Bob. That is the perfect trip description. So I really appreciate you sharing it.
This type of fishing, for anyone that's interested, is going to continue through March, April, and even into May. And the long range boats coming back from that area, they're down below, sometimes like coming up from Mag Bay, the lower banks, and they're seeing, the same schools of tuna this early. So if you got a Colonet trip planned this time of the year, don't be surprised if you run into some bluefin, early season bluefin. If you're looking for a great 6-pack charter boat out of Mission Bay, I highly recommend you give Matt a call, and I'll give you the website. It's limitlessportfishing.com, and then his phone number is 619-987-7814. And if you go on that site, limitlessportfishing.com, you can check his schedule and see what's available and the rates, and take real good care of you.
Links to everything we talked about on the show today will be available in the show description right on your phone or at wonews.com/podcast. Next up, I talk with Mike Lum. You might know his name from the Fred Hall shows over the years, but he is now shifting his attention to Rollo's Kids at Sea, an organization that puts kids out on sport fishing boats to inspire the next generation to go out on the water.
I was 8 years old, and my father passed away, and my mother and I lived in Gardena. And after my dad passed away, I had the good fortune that a neighbor sold their home, and the person that bought their home was a young man and a young wife and 2 babies that they had. And this particular man took a liking to me, and he loved to ocean fish. And so he introduced me to being on a boat at a very young age out of Redondo sport fishing back in the days when they had barges that they would put out there in the summer, and you would access them with a pilot boat. So he introduced me to saltwater fishing that way, and I can tell you that it's been all these years, and I still have not lost my passion for being on the ocean, and I have spent my entire career in and around the fishing, boating, and community and industries. I've never worked outside the industry in my life, and I really attribute that to that very early time when he took me out. Of course, he took me out many times after that, but I don't remember much about those after trips, but I remember that very first trip like it was just a few years ago, and I was 8 years old.
Yeah, so what kind of fishing did you guys do that day?
Well, back in those days, that was really, those barges were anchored off of Redondo Canyon, which to this day is still a very popular fishing place. The barges don't exist anymore, but what's unique about it is they could anchor those barges in fairly shallow water, and yet they were very close to very deep water. So you would catch everything from Bonito was a big target fish back then. We would catch barracuda, we would catch rockfish. Occasionally, I saw my first bluefin tuna that I ever saw in my life on one of those barges, and I didn't know the difference. You know, I was a little kid, probably by then 10 years old, and I thought it was just a giant bonita, and it was about a 15-pound bluefin tuna. And so we caught everything out there. It was just a wonderful fishing opportunity and a great way to introduce people to fishing without having to go a long ways away. And every hour the pilot boat would drop you off, and when you were ready to go in, you'd jump on the next pilot boat and it would take you back in. It was really a great opportunity.
What were your first couple jobs in the fishing industry?
When I was about 16 years old, I was still in high school, I actually started working for the Fowler Gunroom, of all places, in the city of Orange. At 16 years old, they hired me, and I thought I was going in there to stock shelves and clean floors and that kind of stuff. And the very first day, they showed me how to run the cash register and showed me how all the stuff in the store worked. And they actually hired me as a clerk behind the counter, as crazy as that seems now. And I worked for Sam Fowler for about 6 or 7 years, and he was only at that store in Orange a couple more years, maybe a year and a half after I went to work there. And then he opened up a store in Westminster, California called the Stockade, and the Stockade was both fishing and hunting. And I stayed with him until I was in my early 20s, and then moved to a different retailer who had a couple stores, and that was a company called Andrews Sporting Goods. They had at that time 3 stores, and I was with them long enough to get promoted to run a brand new store that they opened up. And I stayed with them. My career continued to grow until they got up to, I think we were at 12 or 13 stores at the time I left. And that was close to 20 years later. And so I've spent most of my young days in retail, and then left there and went to work for a 6-year stint in wholesale distribution, and then ended up working for the Fred Hall shows starting shortly after that, and was there up until just about a month ago, actually. I've been there this entire time as the general manager of the Fred Hall shows, and I think all the people listening to this are certainly familiar with those shows and their evolution this year. If COVID would not have stopped the shows for this 2021 year, would have been our 75th year of consecutive show production, which I don't think anybody could say that anywhere in the country. And the Long Beach show in particular is literally known around the world, and we have visitors each year that fly in to attend the show. So it's a very special event that is unique to Southern California. We're very proud of being there for 20 years that I was.
What'd you witness in terms of the changes in the industry and trends that you've seen come and go? What are some things that you've seen?
Well, during the 20 years that I was there, I mean, there's been tremendous change in the industry. Part of it is a cycle of the fishery that we have, but part of it has to do with politics and rules and regulations, and while other things just have to do with a change in retail. For instance, if you go back 20 years ago, you could go into almost any chain store, a drugstore, a Sears, some of the department stores that are no longer in business, and you would find fishing tackle in every one of them. Mm-hmm. If you went into a Thrifty drugstore, a Save-On drugstore, they all had tackle aisles. And although not everybody that shopped in those stores was a fisherman, obviously, it kept fishing in the forefront of what most people would consider normal and popular. And I think that did a lot for just keeping fishing in the forefront of normal family activities. But today, here we are 20 years later, and with the exception of Walmart, which didn't exist in this marketplace back then, you just don't see fishing tackle unless you go into a tackle store. It is now specialized. It's something that only fishermen do. And average, normal, non-fishermen don't see it, and they're not exposed to it. And I think that's really hurt fishing in a lot of ways because it's out of sight, out of mind. A contrast to that would be Florida, where fishing is very much on everyone's mind. Not everybody fishes, but they're tied to it one way or another. And you see so much more presence of fishing in a state like Florida than you do California, which is ironic because California arguably has just as good, if maybe better fishing, certainly more diverse fishing than Florida. Yeah. The difference is the state of Florida embraces that as a resource and an economic boost, and California just simply doesn't, which is a shame. There's a lot of people living in inner cities within Southern California that just don't realize the high quality of fishing we have, and they kind of look at you funny when you tell them that you went fishing and you caught a tuna, and you caught a tuna where? Well, right off the 3 miles off the beach, and they just don't know it exists. It just doesn't have any saturation into the general public like it used to. And I think that's one of the big changes. One of the other changes is in show production. Shows have been around, consumer shows have been around for a very, very long time. And they play a very important role in letting the public see a broader selection of the product than what they're going to see at their local tackle store. It only makes sense that if you go to the Fred Hall show and you see 400,000 square feet of displays, that you can't expect to go into your local tackle store and see all that stuff. It's impossible. So what you see when you go into a local store is you see selected brands and selected models that the staff or the owners of the store choose to carry. Where we're at a show for the first time and only time, you get to see everything that a manufacturer makes, all the sizes, all the colors, all the models. And that's what makes a show different than just going into a store. And so back in those days, if you go back far enough, selling was not a big part of consumer shows. In fact, there were so many places to go buy fishing tackle that many of the manufacturers refused to participate in shows that allowed selling. I know that sounds completely backwards from the way it is today, where manufacturers today would say, if you don't have selling, I'm not going to be there. And so it is just the opposite. But the reason was there were so many places to send people that it made sense not to sell it at the show. And so today, selling is a huge part of the show. And so there's a significant difference right there.
I'm used to walking out of the Fred Hall show with a giant bag of all the goodies that I bought. So imagining a show like that where you couldn't walk out with purchases totally different, than what we would expect over the past couple of years.
Yeah, it is. And, from an industry's perspective, I could see both sides of it. And I certainly understood back in those days why selling was restricted, because they didn't want to alienate hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of retail locations that had that product in their stock. And if a factory was there selling it or helping sell it at a show, they probably felt like they were selling against them rather than selling for them. So I kind of understood that. But today, where you have fewer and fewer places selling, and that's not new, that's been going on for a long time. This is just the evolution of the shows. But more importantly, and I think the thing that does get overlooked often, is we take for granted here in Southern California shows, and people measure shows by maybe what a good deal I got on this item or that item. And although that's a component of the show, it's actually a very small portion of the purpose of the show. And if somebody comes to the show and their only goal is to save money on buying a reel or a rod, then they really have missed the point. Where else could you go and shake hands with the owner of virtually any sport fishing boat there is and have a conversation? Where else could you go and talk to the product developer for major tackle companies? Where else could you go and actually pick up all the different models of rods and reels and shake them and touch them and turn the handle? Where else could you go and talk to a guy that for a living guides in Costa Rica, and you could have a one-on-one conversation with him about the fishing there and why I should go there instead of someplace else. And you combine all of that along with hundreds and hundreds of seminars teaching people how to catch more fish, how to do, how to spend time in the field more effectively. And I could go on for too long talking about all the other aspects of the show, but there are a lot of other aspects of the show. And when someone says, well, you could spend multiple days at the Long Beach Fred Hall show and not see it all. Well, that's really true if you take advantage of the opportunities that are there to sit and visit with someone, to talk with someone. Not to mention, it's a great place to meet new people, and you get caught up in the moment. We all do. I've been doing it my entire life, and yet I still get caught up in that fever of being in a show where there's thousands and thousands of like-minded people, and I can hardly get through a day without finding an item or a trip that I don't want to buy or book myself. I mean, I get caught up in it just like everybody else, and I do it every day. So when you come to the show and you walk out with a bag full of stuff, I doubt seriously if when you came to that show you had a checklist of things you were going to buy. You might have had an item or two you were looking for, but most of the things you buy, you didn't figure out you wanted to buy them until you were there and you got caught up and it was an impulse. Well, you're not the only one. Everyone is that way. Well, when you add that number up, you are now supporting an industry that literally bases their entire year financially on the well-being of those shows. And if it's not for sales that take place at the show, it's impressions that are put on those people so that 3 months from now or 4 months from now, they know what they want to buy. No different than trips, right? You book a trip to go to some place you never thought you were going to go. Why? Because you got a chance to talk to the guy that does it, and he got you excited about it, and your buddy was there with you, and he said, if you'll go, I'll go. And before you know it, you guys just booked a couple trips, and you multiply that over thousands and thousands of interactions. And at the end of the day, the economic impact that these shows have on the well-being of the industry is enormous. It's certainly a lot more important than, did I get a good deal on that rod or that reel? Or those are benefits of the show, but they certainly are not what the show's about.
It's a big impact economically, but it's an even bigger impact, I would say, culturally for the fishing industry. To not have a place for everybody to meet together is just a big gap in the culture of fishing.
Well,
especially here
I
in
know
Southern
so
California.
many people, and I think you probably do too. They make an actual event out of this each year. This is like a Super Bowl party. This is a holiday for a lot of these people. They take days off work. They schedule their vacations around it. They travel, some from the East Coast, many from the East Coast. And I know because every year they would call and want to know what the seminar lineups were weeks before they were really done, because they wanted to book airfare. They wanted to know what days they needed to be there. And so it literally is a focal point and a culture that's been developed over all of these years. And like I said, I take it a little personally when I feel that somebody has kind of overlooked all of that, and they overlook a year's worth of effort and work and a year's worth of strategizing with the manufacturers and all the other exhibitors that make this thing breathe life. And the end result is I didn't have a good time at the show because they were out of that one item I wanted to buy at some particular booth. It's like, I don't get it. I mean, that would be like going to Disneyland and complaining because a particular soft drink that they wanted to drink was out of stock that day. It's just, I don't understand how you could even look at it that way, but they do.
How do we bring more people into this hobby without having these massive get-togethers like we used to?
Well, I think that the massive get-togethers will reoccur. I think this will be 2021 will probably be the year that we don't see them. And there will be some smaller ones that I'm sure will crop up to help fill some of the void. But as painful as it is to see all of these big events not occurring, specifically in the fishing and boating community, this would probably be the best year ever for there not to be an event, if you could look at it that way, because the fishing and boating and all outdoor recreation over the last 10 months has had a level of business that they could have never predicted and likely will never see again. People had time off that they didn't have. They got to fish more. They got to camp more. They got to go out in the outdoors more, which led to sales. Across the board, product production couldn't keep up. They weren't ready for it. And a lot of the factories were closed down because of COVID. So the supply chain was disrupted, but the demand actually was double what it normally would have been. And we have sold more licenses, more fishing licenses in this state throughout this year than we have in the last 5 or 6 years combined as far as any kind of growth. And so we have a wonderful opportunity to bring these people that have come into fishing and boating this year because of COVID likely will be around for many years to come. And so if we use 2021 kind of as a year to catch our breath, get restocked, count our blessings in a lot of ways, and look towards 2022 of the year to bring it all back together again, I think 2022 could potentially be the largest and most popular consumer show year that we've ever seen.
You not only have you been working with the Fred Hall shows throughout the years, but you've definitely been spending more time with this passion of getting young kids on the water, similar to your story when you were 8 years old. Tell me about Friends of Rollo.
I have always believed that if you get novice people, especially young children, out on the water for the first time, that it leaves an impression. And in many cases, it's always a memory. It's always something they will remember. But in many cases, it leaves a lasting, lifelong impression. And that impression oftentimes leads to a young person's desire to stay involved in the outdoors. In my case, it was so powerful for me that obviously at 8 years old, I didn't realize what was happening. It's one of the few things in my life that I look back on, and I have such vivid memories of my first experience. And I remember as years ticked by and I got to experience broader and different types of fishing, being in different types of boats, going different places. It never seemed to end. It hasn't ended yet. I still feel that way to this day. And I still dream about going places that I haven't been able to go to. But it all goes back to that first experience when I was a kid. So when I got familiar with Friends of Rollo, and I know that sounds like a peculiar name, and for people that understand it and have known it from its inception, they don't give that any thought. But how this all started was back in 1999, one of the local, very popular long-range fishing captains, Rollo Hine. Rollo was a nickname to him, but that's how everyone knew him, was as Rollo. He died, and when he died, literally a group of his closest friends said, we got to do something. We got to form something and keep this guy's memory alive. Thus, Friends of Rollo was created. Okay, so Captain Rollo's Kids at Sea is the name that we give to the trips that we take these kids on. Now, there's a little confusion. We don't organize trips and gather kids. We do the opposite. Other organizations gather the kids, and these could be church groups, they could be Boy Scout troops, Girl Scout troops, they could be public school classes, it could be underprivileged kids, it could be kids from child youth homes where there are no parents involved. It's from all walks of life. And when those people, those different organizations contact us, they say, we'd like to get a trip. And what our role is to organize the boat, the landing, the tackle, the lunches. We pay for everything. Once we grant that trip, the group's responsibility is to get their kids to the landing and home. We do everything else. Each year, we charter as many boats as we can afford to charter. We grant as many trips as we can. We try to benefit between 5,000 and 7,000 kids each year with this program. In 2019, we chartered 104 boats up and down the coast from San Diego all the way up to San Francisco. We paid for every single one of those trips.
Wow, and they're all loaded with kids fishing for possibly the first time ever.
Well, they're all for the first time ever. Sometimes they've fished maybe in freshwater or off a pier or something like that, but fishing from a boat, it's their first time fishing, and it is also the first time they've been exposed to our marine life and marine life resources. So they get to see, the dolphins for the first time, or the sea lions, or they get to see, the bait in the bait tank and the seagulls hovering over the boat, and things that we take for granted because we've seen it our whole life is mesmerizing to a child who has never seen it other than on television.
Yeah.
And it is truly remarkable to watch the kids as they absorb this. And just like I did when I was 8 years old, I was fascinated. Back in those days, we didn't have sardines. We were during that period where sardines didn't exist on the West Coast. They were gone at that time. So anchovies was, when I remember very distinctly sticking my nose into that bait tank for the first time and seeing those anchovies, and I was just amazed because I'd seen goldfish before in a bowl, but I never seen that many fish in anything in my life ever. And who would even think of that? Why would that leave an impression on a kid? But it absolutely does. And the thought that you could take an anchovy that was on the deck dead, pick it up, and throw it up to a seagull who would then swoop down and catch it in midair, to a kid that's never done that before, that is a huge thing, and it's as an everlasting memory.
Everybody that's listening to this had somebody in their life that introduced them to fishing, whether it was a friend, a neighbor, a family member. Somebody showed us the ropes and said, hey, look at this world out here, and introduced us to it. What would happen if that person wasn't in our lives? And that's kind of the gap that you guys are bridging with this program. I think it's great.
The common thread is you're taking kids that have never had and probably never would have an opportunity to be on a boat for the first time. And where that leads them, we've been doing it long enough now. We actually have people that are working as charter sport boat operators, captains. They have their captain's license, and their first trip on the ocean was on a Rollo trip. So that's, to me, that kind of speaks volumes with how impactful this can be. And even for those kids that don't absolutely fall in love with the ocean and decide to make it a part of their life, their experience is still there. And what they saw and what they did experience, they'll remember for many, many years. We are approaching 140,000 kids that have benefited from this program in all of these years. So even if you took only 5% of that, the number of kids whose lives have been affected in a positive way is immense. I mean, it's immense.
How can people get involved? What's the website? How can people help out with this?
Well, the website's really easy. It's Rollo Kids, plural, rollokids.org. And if you go to rollokids.org, you'll see all the information there about the organization and how we got started. You'll see the list of the board members that are associated with this. We do a lot of different things to raise money. It takes us about $30 per child on an average to make this all work. Well, when we're taking 5,000 to 7,000 of them a year, it adds up very quickly, and it's like, where do we get enough funding to meet the demands? And so we're very creative when we do a lot of different events. We had great fortune the last 7 years. Most people are familiar with the television show Wicked Tuna, and fortunately for us, for our organization, Captain Paul Hebert and Captain Dave Marciano have been supportive of us, and they come out each June, and we charter a couple of boats, and people pay a premium to fish on the respective teams. And the program is called Tuna Wars. And what we do is we take these 2 boats full of people who have paid a lot of money to fish with their favorite captain. It's the 3 largest tuna on each boat weighed against each other to determine who the winning team is. And there's always a rivalry of who won the last time and who's going to come and win the next time. And there's no money exchanged. All the money is strictly to benefit the program. The winners get embroidered jackets and bragging rights for the next year. And we typically sell that out every year. It comes up, I think the trip this June will leave on the 29th, somewhere around that, of June, and it's a 2-day fishing trip that runs out of Fisherman's Landing. There's some information on that on the website as well. And the night before those trips leave for the 2-day fishing tournament, we have what we call a captain's reception at Dana Landing down in Mission Bay, and it's an outdoor event. And we are planning on doing that Sunday, the June 28th of this year. You do not have to participate in the fishing to take part. Captains are there. You can get autographs, get your pictures taken with them and whatnot. And we do a real fun raffle. We have food, and it starts about 4 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon and runs till about 7 o'clock. Something people ought to put on their calendar. It doesn't cost much. I think it's $25 or $30 a ticket to get in. There's a lot of different ways. There's online donations that you can take part in there on the website. And we're just kicking off a reoccurring payment plan. If somebody, knowing that it costs about $30 a kid, if you want to sponsor 10 kids for a year, you can do that simply by donating $25 a month. And it automatically comes on your credit card. You can cancel it anytime. You're not obligating yourself to anything. But if you were to do that for a year, you would be responsible for adding 10 more kids to the list.
Thanks again to Mike Lum for sharing all that information. Again, everything that we talked about on the show today is linked in the show description or at wonews.com/podcast. Remember to subscribe and leave a review and tell a friend about the show. Thanks for listening.